Most well-known depictions of gods are of magnificent beings possessing various values that we humans see as ideal or perfect. Religious texts like the Bible tell us that while we were created in God's image and likeness, we've become essentially flawed, while God himself remains flawless. Modern theism tends to paint a god as being with infinite power, plus endless knowledge, morality, and omnipotence. Gods are always, in whichever way, above mere mortals. We pitch them as though they're basically running things from behind the scenes. But this actually wasn't always the case. If we look back to earlier religions and belief systems, especially polytheistic ones, we encounter deities that are rife with error and immoral behavior. The gods of Greek mythology, for instance, engaged in many acts considered cruel or barbaric, including murder, cheating, betrayal, and torture. Hades, the god of the Greek underworld, kidnapped the goddess Persephone and forced her to live with him. Kronos ate his own children, while Thor, of Norse fame, would frequently slaughter and eat his own pair of goats before resurrecting them and putting them through the ordeal over and over again. Freya, the Norse goddess of love, started a bloody human war, according to legend, killing countless soldiers just to obtain a necklace. All to say, gods are a complex concept. Still, many civilizations have certainly idealized the prospect of becoming a god. Ancient stories often tell of demigods who are human but possess some divine powers from birth. They bridge between here, the flawed and often terrible mortal world, and there, the faultless and spectacular immortal plane. And as such, they're vitally important in the mythologies of the Chinese, Japanese, the Celts, the Greeks, in Hindu scripture, and more. Demigod has even been a title given to some historical figures who seemed to be more than human. Alexander the Great referred to himself as the son of Zeus. The Buddha was a regular human who was later deified, as was the ancient king Gilgamesh, the central character in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is held to be one of the oldest stories ever written. But ultimately, a demigod's powers are limited. A full god, on the other hand, is without limits of any kind. They can control the fabric of space-time, manipulate the laws of the universe, and create entire worlds. The thing about the Kardashev scale and other similar civilization ranking systems is that theoretically it imagines that one day this level of power should be achievable through science and technology. It posits that many of the individual characteristics and capabilities of gods are theoretically possible. The instant creation of life, for example, perhaps doubles up as the building and switching on of fully conscious AI. Machines that it's predicted will soon be capable of thought, feeling, and reasoning, just like humans are. To those robots, might we, their creators, stand as gods in their minds? Changing life in an instant looks increasingly as though it'll soon be possible too, thanks to gene editing tools like CRISPR-Cas9. The idea of customizing life, then, of creating it in our own image, actually isn't that far off. Next, there are plans to use similar technology to breathe life back into extinct species, such as the woolly mammoth. Should that come to pass, then we'd have a divine-like dominion over the dead as well. And then there are the various proposals being made today toward immortality. And if that can ever be achieved, then we'd have truly mastered arguably the single greatest difference between us and our gods, the ability to never die. Much of what we're talking about here falls under the umbrella term for a potential future world, transhumanism. Through things like reverse aging technologies, part artificial bodies, mind uploads, and consciousness drives, the idea is that we will one day move beyond human. We'll redefine our species and thereby accelerate our own possibilities. We'll accelerate along the road to becoming gods. And from there, in this future time with so much more of reality open and available to us, is it so hard to imagine that we could be manipulating space and time too? Right now, we have a reasonable knowledge about the universe and quantum physics, the macro and micro worlds, but we also know that there's so much more left to learn. And as transhuman entities, that's just what we'll do. But what does life actually look like for this future version of ourselves? What implications would human gods have for society and civilization? There'd undoubtedly be much that would change, but perhaps a surprising amount would also stay the same. Money would be pointless. Gods can basically create whatever they want, so currency would be phased out entirely. But if everyone became a god, it stands to reason not everyone would be equally as powerful. or not everyone would have identical powers at least. So while material wealth might be a thing of the past, perhaps hierarchies would still exist. Generally speaking, the most powerful and important ancient gods were those with abilities that were most needed or desired. Among the most ardently worshipped Egyptian gods, for example, were the ones that governed the afterlife, the ones that brought the sun, and those that provided their people with knowledge and wisdom. Which skills and values would be most prized in a transhuman God versus God world? Of course, there's also the possibility that we'd stick with our democracy despite all of our godliness and vote on a head god to run things. But again, which gods and personalities would be most likely to get elected? One seeming positive to humans becoming gods should be no more war, mainly because no one can die anymore, so fights and wars would solve nothing. There is still a darker side, however. Polytheistic gods of history typically solved disagreements by placing wagers, often involving some kind of human scenario or even sacrifice. While the gods didn't always retaliate against one another, they did vent frustrations via human beings. The Greek gods would often punish the mortals for things other deities did, while the Christian God brings immense suffering upon the human Job simply to settle a disagreement with Satan. Were we to become gods then, we might similarly look to lower life forms in a bid to settle a disagreement or prove a point. That instant creation of life from earlier could double up as an endless supply of playthings to manipulate. Sentient robots forced into dire situations as a direct result of our godliness. In the famous story of the Iliad, the Greek gods chose sides and intervene in the central war to sway things. Athena designs the famous Trojan horse for the Greeks, and Poseidon and Apollo actively kill Greeks on the battlefield to support Troy. So again, while direct conflicts might be a thing of the past, our involvement in war and bloodshed, unfortunately, may not totally disappear. In fact, a pessimistic telling of this hypothetical scenario sees more than just the odd battle played out under human god hands. As is evident from how humans can act on Earth as just regular beings, kindness is often lacking or completely absent, while meanness and evil can come to the fore. As such, creaking beneath the might of so many new gods, all born out of humankind, the whole universe could suffer. Again, there's precedent in just our own beliefs about gods. The biblical God ordered Abraham to kill his own son. Eshu of Yoruba mythology took pleasure in violence, and Greece's Ares manifested war itself. The general concept that gods aren't completely good and can act malevolently is called dystheism, with the Norse trickster god Loki being perhaps the best example of all. But if any human flaws were to carry over as well, then there'd likely be immense acts of evil played out, and quickly. Drunk with power, human gods could be the end of civilization rather than the pinnacle of it. What's your verdict? Could we be so unkind? Or might the very fact that we'd have made it to God level mean that we'll have also shed all of our worst traits by that time? Is that the true nature of civilization advancement? Simply to find a way to live in total harmony? But then again, there's an irony at play. Because were we to reach that state of bliss, would we then become bored and listless? The renowned historian Yuval Noah Harari, for one, argues that humanity achieving a godlike status through technology would lead to a demotivated species with no reason to live. In his book Homo Deus, he writes, quote, "Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who don't know what they want?" End quote. For that is essentially what we could become. Unlimited knowledge, yes. Unlimited power, sure. But absolute happiness and satisfaction? It's perhaps impossible to know until we get there. But that's what would happen if humans became